welcome to the show, Jaap. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, great to be here, Katie, and thanks for having me.
Now, could you explain what is persuasive technology? That's a term that a lot of people wouldn't have heard of.
In general, without going into definitions, it's something that we use all the time. Technology that's trying to influence us, like your smartphone is trying to influence you to keep it on and to check some website or to post something on social media. That's technology that's trying to influence you. It might also be in a bit more of a science fiction form, like a robot that's trying to influence you, which you may already encounter in like a hotel or in a shop nowadays. But that's a bit more science fiction. But still, such technology can also be technology that somehow tries to influence you, trying to sell you more shirts or another type of hamburger on which they make a bit more profit. It's common already in our daily lives. Technology that's trying to influence our behavior and our thinking.
And you talk about the term feedback, which is central to your work with looking at coloured lights. Now, a lot of people haven't really, when we think about feedback, we think about someone telling us, like, did we do a good job at work? Like, what does feedback mean in the context of your work on coloured lights and energy efficiency?
No, actually, it is quite comparable. So if we program our washing machine or programmable thermostat in our homes, because that system, the heater or the washing machine, is going to use electricity or gas. What do you call it? The natural gas. And most of the time, we don't have a clue about how much electricity or how much energy such a device is going to use. And when that device gives you feedback, tells you something about a consequence that you have to that device, so to say, or caused through using that device, it gives you feedback about energy consumption, just as I will be giving you feedback on what I think about this blog or this interview, right? That's comparable. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds so obvious, but it's a phrase that most people who are sustainability practitioners do not commonly use. It's something that's used in behavioral psychology and cognitive science. But this idea that we can have these real-time data feeds under the umbrella term of feedback. I think it's a word that we really need to get out.
And real time is really important here. So research suggests that sending people an annual energy consumption bill is not very effective. Well, it is effective for making them pay the bill, but it's not very effective for making them use less energy. And giving feedback directly at the right moment in time and in place where you're performing the behavior, that's most effective for actually changing the behavior. And very often, actually, diminishing energy consumption too much is not really to the advantage of electricity producers and the companies that sell you electricity.
Yeah, well, that's actually one of my later questions to ask you. So if you've got this feedback, you've got one, it's real time, like within a second of it happening. Then you can have it maybe a day later, like here's how you did yesterday. Then here's how you did last week, last month, last year. What's the diminishing returns on feedback in terms of real time versus a couple of hours ago versus a couple of days ago? How much should we be obsessed with getting it as real time as possible?
I don't know. We didn't really study that. I also don't know what I had for dinner yesterday evening. And with that, I mean that indeed information about the past, both us remembering, okay, how did I program my thermostat yesterday? Or how did I program my washing machine yesterday? Something that you forget about. And then if a day later, some system would tell me, okay, yesterday you've used this and that amount of energy, it is really, really difficult to connect that to behavior of yesterday. If indeed, while performing the behavior now, I get feedback, just like in real life, when I hit myself, hit some object, I feel the pain like right now. That's how my learning system works most optimally, without me having to remember, oh yeah, when I hit the door and then a day later, we get feedback about consisting of pain. That's not
right. If you got pain a day later, you wouldn't be as good as keeping yourself out of trouble. So it sounds like you haven't done an exact study testing various types of feedback, but overall you think the real time is where the real superpower is, which I think we can all
real time and real place, so to say. So while I'm performing the behavior at that moment in time, telling people where they are, that place, what the consequences will be of that behavior, invisible consequences.
Right,
and that is the artificiality of your laundry machine and of the heating system, that you don't really feel what it produces as for consequences in the future.
Right, so real time and real place.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, hold on, I've just got to close the door. My daughter just opened it and you can hear the train going past. Okay. Now, before we dive more deeply into that, tell me what ambient feedback is. Feedback is the numbers. What is feedback when it is ambient?
Feedback doesn't necessarily mean consist of numbers. So you can also tell somebody something in a more qualitative way. And our washing machines that we used in these studies, for example, used an energy bar, as we called it, that showed more LEDs to presenting white light, so to say, dependent on how much energy you would consume. For example, if you turn the temperature dial, which is the most important variable, the temperature of the water, up, then the energy bar would also quite quickly go up. And such feedback might present it in many different forms, like, for example, in numbers, for example, in an LED bar that goes up or down, or, for example, a robot might tell you when it's connected to that system and positioned right on top of your washing machine, your energy consumption is terrible, sir, or something like that. And those forms of feedback that I've just sketched are all forms of feedback to which you do need to spend some attention. So you need to listen to that robot, focus a bit on it. You need to look at that number indicating how many kilowatt hours your washing machine will be consuming. And you need to look at that energy bar. And many of those forms of feedback that you have to look at use a lot of cognitive resources. Like, most people don't have too much of a clue of what kilowatt hours are. But also this LED bar, which is much more simple, of course, to process, still needs your attention. And when your kids are harassing you, for example, and people do have different and more important goals in their lives than saving energy, at least as it appears to them, spending attention to such feedback is really, really difficult, actually, and doesn't fit too well to people's motivation. And what we've done in some other studies is investigate whether other forms of feedback, what we called ambient feedback that's much more a part of your environment, might also be effective, to which you don't have to spend too much attention. Like, for example, a lighting source that is present in your room, and that gives you feedback about your energy consumption by changing from red when you use a lot of energy to green when you use only little amounts of energy. Might be there, and you don't really have to focus too much on it, and still your energy consumption behavior, for example, turning that temperature dial, might be influenced. We even showed in a study that when you distract people while programming their washing machine, and while they're being given this using such a lighting source, and while you distract them with some additional task, remembering some numbers, that they can still process quite well such ambient feedback, such feedback on which they don't have to focus, and that a second distraction task, a secondary distraction task, does interfere with processing numbers, does interfere with processing numerical feedback consisting of, you now consume so many kilowatt hours of electricity or so many kilowatt hours of electricity. So that might be quite effective to give people more simple forms of feedback. Just like pain is also a relatively simple form of feedback about which you don't have to think too much. You just get it, and it directly influences your behavior.
Right. That's so interesting the way you just explained it, because when I was thinking about what ambient feedback was, I was just thinking of ambient in terms of like it was just in the environment, like it was like on the wall, or it was out on the street, or in the elevator. But the way you've described it is those things, but in addition to that, it's ambient also psychologically, in that you can take on other cognitive tasks at the same time. A light on your dashboard. You can drive at the same time. You can basically drive your car and infer what's going on the dashboard. Whereas if you actually look at your smartphone and try to think through something, you could have a car accident and die because you can't switch attention. I mean, that's why the lighting is powerful.
Also. That's another label that we use for it. It's not like in your focal area, but rather around you. Yeah.
Right. It's really, yeah, I find it really, really fascinating. I'm working on this project called Energy Lollipop, which I just intuitively grasped onto this idea, which is what led me to find your research, because I'm thinking about how to save the planet all the time with data. That's the work I do. It's what I'm fascinated by. And I thought, can't we just see carbon emissions or the kilowatts carbon intensity of the kilowatts just on the street in a colored light? Like, why can't I see that? Why can't I just get a big orb that's out on the street and shows it to everybody? And I think that if everybody was looking at that and it was on all the buildings and on all the things and in people's houses and stairwells, people would start to change. I mean, what are your thoughts on this community scale ambient feedback? Like, not just in your home or on your computer, but what about for your whole school, for your town, for your city? Like, can it expand to include everyone as a group, as well as everyone as an individual, and have an effect on people?
Might be. We studied and developed this concept of ambient persuasive technology because we think it's interesting. The most effective forms of feedback, of the most effective forms of influencing human behavior, might be those forms that make use of human sensitivity, those influencing strategies that people are most sensitive to. And such forms are very often social, like we are very, very sensitive to what other people think of us, for example. We will buy these shirts that have a certain label on it to show off how wealthy we are, or to show off how much we are part of a certain group or cultural community, even though they're very expensive and painful in that sense. And this indicates that we're very sensitive to, if there's somebody else evaluating me, telling me, you look nice today, sir, I'm gonna like that person, even though I know, he's only telling me this because he's trying to sell me this wreck of an old car. But still, it's probably gonna be an effective sales strategy. He's still using it after all these years of being a car sales agent, and most of his clients know that it's fake, but still it is effective. We love people who are friendly to us and who brown nose us. Yeah, research also showed that even though your employees are doing it on purpose, you still like it.
Right.
Where
so
was I
you're
going?
saying that I'll just
Yeah.
jump
So
in. And
that's the strategies that you want to use. Those that people are like really sensitive to, even though they know, I'm falling into the trap again of eating this pizza or saying yes to this car sales agent. And those strategies, energy consumption, feedback systems may also use. So they can package their feedback in such a form. And for example, use social networks to which people are also quite sensitive. Yeah, being part of the group or.
I just want to summarize that, because I think that's a novel concept for most people, that feedback, that is the numbers, for example, of kilowatt hours you're using, you or your city or water, or it could be any type of environmental indicator. It can come through a non-social mechanism, like an app or a chart, or it can come through a social mechanism, which could be a human saying, hi. I mean, it could be something like as low tech as, like, what if someone calls you and says, hi, I'm just giving you feedback that you used 1.37 kilowatt hours of electricity today. It's coming from a person. But you can also make like an avatar, like a robot. It doesn't have to be a real human. Yeah. And the human can be likable. Like, it could compliment you and say, hey, I just wanted to tell you that you're a really good person and you did a great job. Or I just want to tell you that I'm a little bit annoyed at you right now. And we're far more sensitive. We need to think about how sensitive the human is to the different types. And we are much more sensitive to feedback when it comes from a social form than a non-social form. Am I getting that right?
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be a real human being that's trying to influence you. Our research suggests, and many other studies actually do, that people are sensitive to these social strategies that are let loose on them. They have these buttons that can be pressed, but what or who presses the buttons is not that important. So if a robot tells you, your hair looks great today, sir, I'm gonna feel okay, thank you. And even when I know, like our students who very often serve as participants in our studies, and they're University of Technology students, they know that robots are not real people, and you're not gonna like date them tomorrow or meet them again on the street. And still, when that robot tells me, your hair looks great today, sir, I'm gonna be a bit more now willing to do something else that it requests of me, for example. even though I'm quite aware that it's fake.
Right. So even if we're lying, if we compliment people, make people feel good about themselves, then they will like us or the robot or whatever social application
it works when people
and then
do
people
it.
will be more willing to do the thing that we're asking them to do.
Yeah. So you can also use technology in the form of a social entity, very simple smiley or frowny, for example. And even when people know this is not a real human being, still such a smiley or frowny is able to influence them, even subliminally. Yeah, we ran a study in which we had people program this home thermostat. They could only press the up button or the down button. And right next to that button, we had included in that thermostat a little gray area on which we presented a smiling or frowning icon face. And when you press the up button, the frowning face will be displayed. And when you press the down button, the smiling face will be presented. And for 1/3 of our participants, that face was presented supraliminally, so you could easily see it. And for another 1/3 of our participants, that face was only briefly flashed for 27 milliseconds with some little pre-mask in front of it and pre-mask after it, such that there's no after image on your eye, on your retina. And such a subliminal flash indeed was not, we asked our participants, not seen consciously. And then a third group, we did not provide with such feedback, such information about whether you're causing something positive or negative. And results of that study suggested that indeed it didn't matter whether we presented that feedback supraliminally or subliminally, very easy to be seen, or flashed the feedback. Both types of feedback led to people using less energy for the programming tasks that we had given them. So you might also use unconscious flashes even to influence energy consumption behavior.
Right.
At least if it's allowed.
That's really fascinating. So just to make sure I've got it right, that when you can see the smiley face and you consciously know that you're getting a smiley face because you saved energy, and you consciously know that you're getting a frowny face, that if you flash it so fast that you don't even consciously know it, it'll still have more or less the same effect.
Yeah. And now this task also was a bit boring to people, probably. So even those people who consciously saw the face, they had to press the buttons, and then they saw those faces over and over again. So they perhaps even did not spend too much attention anymore, even though they could see the faces to those faces because they saw them all the time.
And I'm curious about how your experiments on using colored light. Also, I didn't get to ask you this question earlier. Can you just summarize the findings from your experiments with the green, the orange, and the red light on people's energy consumption?
Okay. So in those studies, we used programmable washing machine. And I know that our European washing machines are a bit more complex, at least the interfaces, than your American washing machine. So we actually have to
I'm just at the laundromat. I'm way down on Maslow's hierarchy at the laundromat, really simple.
The thermostat dial is something you can change, and the spinning rate and some other buttons. And we made this virtual washing machine interface on a computer screen in the earlier studies. And in that interface, we included systems, like, for example, an energy bar that goes from low to high levels of energy consumption, or a number indicating how many kilowatt hours. And in later studies, we removed such an element from the interface and added to the system, right next to the computer screen on the participant's desk, a lighting source that gave comparable feedback that went from red to white, indicating something like in the middle, to green, indicating low levels of energy consumption. And such feedback using colored light gave people comparable information to the numbers that we presented or the LED bar that we used. And our studies showed that when you use such more ambient forms of feedback, colored lighting that is, people's energy consumption went down even further than when we presented this feedback in a more factual form, like presenting numbers or presenting simple evaluation actually of numbers, which that energy bar can be considered to be.
Right, so the summary of the findings is that if you had to choose between giving somebody numbers and between giving someone just a colored light with no numbers, the colored light has a better effect than showing people the numbers.
Yeah, the more simple, the better. And in addition, also in this line of research, we ran one study in which we distracted people with a secondary task. And also here we found, or did I already tell that indeed when they have to do a second task, that colored lighting is still information that people seem to be able to process, whereas such a secondary task diminishes the effectiveness of numbers that they have to process to be able to reduce their energy consumption.
Yeah, so, and that's really fascinating about color, which is something that I use in all. I don't know if you ever had a look at the design work I do, but I'm always using color central to the feedback, and then layering over other types of behavioral psychology mechanisms. But with the smiley face one that you mentioned, that it still works when it's flashed so quickly. Do you think if you have colored light and people don't even notice the colored light, like let's say at the bottom of your apartment building when you walk in the door, there's a light and it's changing between different colors depending on what your electricity usage has been for the day, and you're just walking in and out of your house and you're not noticing it, or maybe it's out on the street or it's in an office building with people there. Do you think if the colored light is there and you say, did you notice the colored light, and people are like, oh, I don't know. No, I don't know. I got lots of things on. I'm busy going to a meeting. Do you think it would be like the subliminal smiley face, that it would be unconsciously affecting people, even if they're not totally registering what color it was today or that hour?
Yes. So if indeed that lighting source would be close to the time and place where you perform the behavior that causes energy consumption, people don't have to spend attention too much to such energy consumption feedback. However, if you would put that lighting source outside of my own apartment, like in the central hallway, it would be quite disconnected from my own particular behavior that causes certain energy consumption consequences. And making that link between, okay, the light is red today, and that's maybe because this morning I have used my laundry dryer machine, which uses a lot of energy. For such a link, you need a lot of prefrontal cortex thinking. And then it may probably become way less effective. So if the feedback system is right on top of the time and place of your behavior, then it's going to be effective. And then you don't have to spend too much attention to it. However, if I want to give you feedback about something that happened yesterday, I have to get your attention, and you really have to think a bit about it, right? And then you are able to change your behavior the next time you have to do it, but it costs much more cognitive effort.
Right. My co-founder just got our Energy Lollipop app, and he put it on a little iPad, or they call it like a little tablet, and just like sticky taped it to the washing machine because it shows the carbon intensity of the grid.
Yeah.
Oh, look at this. Idea. Very hungry caterpillar. So cute.
We ran a study actually in which we added eyes, a picture like one your daughter could have made of two eyes to a washing machine, to the wall next to a washing machine, and in the third condition, no eyes were present in the vicinity of the washing machine. And indeed, when we found that both the first and the second condition cause people to use less energy as compared to the third condition. So if somebody is watching you, either the machine or some eyes on the wall, then people use less energy.
Do the eyes need to light up red if they're using too much or green?
Those were just static eyes.
So they're not
just static eyes, not doing anything. So there's quite some research on giving people the experience that they're being watched.
I remember seeing that. It's like people
social facilitation, this is called.
They give more money in the honesty box. If there's like a sign that has the eyes.
And if in general proper behavior is to use only little amounts of electricity, then indeed this study suggested that when people feel watched, they're going to show more proper behavior,
right?
Correct
so we're
behavior.
Just developing all these complicated smart meter APIs and apps, and maybe we could just do a big mailbox drop of eyes. and just to like not worry about the technology, just do it with plain paper and just like stick it on the washing machine. Maybe use some social norms, get people to photograph themselves in front of their washing machine eyes and put it on Instagram. And
and we haven't really studied long-term effectiveness of such simple influencing strategies like of eyes. I do remember a study by a guy from the Netherlands, Michael Handgraaf and colleagues. And he studied people's energy consumption behavior while they were using their laptop. And he told all his participants, okay, if you turn off your laptop during lunch break, then you're going to use less energy. And at the end of each week, he gave all of his participants a piece of paper on which their energy consumption was described in kilowatt hours. And to half of his participants, in addition to that piece of paper, he gave them an envelope with a bit of money in it. That is 10 times as much as amount of the value of the electricity that they had saved, because it's not too much when you close your laptops at certain moments in time during a week that you save. And the other half of his participants, he gave the same piece of paper, and now he had written with pen on that piece of paper a smiley or a frowny, dependent on their energy consumption, and a little message like well done or could be better, and thereby giving them a social form of feedback instead of a monetary form of feedback, a reward. And he measured people's energy consumption for a period of like 6 months. And in the first 3 months of that, he indeed gave them each week this feedback, either the little letter with the money or the letter with the handwriting on it. And both groups diminished their energy consumption. Not too many differences there. After the 3 months had ended, he stopped giving feedback, but and the electricity measurement devices were still there, so he just kept his setup running. And he found out that those people who had been given financial rewards for saving energy quite quickly returned back to their normal energy consumption, like before the whole experiment, but before the intervention. The group that had received in those first 3 months a social form of feedback continued for a longer period of time using less energy. So we need to do a lot more research on this, but this suggests that if indeed you use those strategies that people more naturally are sensitive to because of how they're built or how they've been raised, then you tap into systems that can be more effective and that can also be more enduring. So it might indeed be the case that these lighting sources that change color remain effective even after a couple of months. And we know actually from about a lot of websites where people can log in to get information about their energy consumption. You have these smart meters in people's homes now, right? And there's these websites that your electricity company may give you access to on which you can get information about your energy consumption and other measures that most people only log in once and then never again anymore. And
that's what's so...
Especially the old-fashioned websites that only give you like numbers. But if there's more things on such a website that you're sensitive to, then it's gonna be more effective.
Well, this is why we have these conversations. So people like us and hopefully other people listening, our job is to design these interfaces. I mean, I get hired by companies like this to design these interfaces. It's funny, I actually did get hired by a fairly established building energy company, and I've done multiple projects for them. And the first draft of the designs, I put like smiley faces on all of the building energy use, and a concerned face if a building, it was for commercial building. And the first draft of feedback, they said, Katie, it needs to look more professional. Please take all the emojis off. And I was like, oh, you guys don't understand, because they're all like mechanical engineers and they're very corporate. So unfortunately, the powerful bit of feedback, they wanted to take it away.
Yeah, but such companies, of course, and that's quite understandable, have multiple reasons for building such technology, for building such websites. Part of it is indeed that they want to help people reduce their energy consumption, but also they want these customers to have a certain image of the company, etc. And they don't want people to save too much, because then they'll be selling less energy.
Well, I think it was just it was a commercial product, so they wanted to keep that brand of it being very commercial. I mean, I personally don't think smileys are unprofessional, uncommercial, but in their view, they were. I was kind of just making it look like Instagram. But I was like, I haven't even gotten into the watermelons and caterpillars yet, guys. I was like, I could go really crazy.
And certain strategies might be effective to certain people. And that's a topic that we haven't really touched upon, and it's called personalizing persuasive technology, making it more well suited for certain types of people. So for some people, saying you have to do this because the doctor tells you to do it might be quite effective, and they will do it. If you wear a white coat and you tell them use less energy, they'll do it. But there's also people who don't like such an influencing strategy and who become reactant when you tell them what to do. And for such people, other strategies might be more effective. For some people, smileys that look a bit childish or whatever may be quite very effective. They may love such pictures. For other people, they may also be effective, but in addition to that, it may also make them feel a bit uneasy or dislike the technology. And then perhaps for those people, you may have to choose different forms of persuasive technology.
Oh,
so
right.
Personalizing the interface is also really important. Yeah.
Because I remember in one of the lines I highlighted it, and now I can't remember what the three things were. They were from Cialdini, and he said that there were three main ways to influence people.
Yeah,
one was social norms, that we want to copy, imitate other people. The other one was what you mentioned, which is that it's authoritative. We want to follow the rules. And now I can't remember the third one. What was it?
Yeah, I've written that paper.
You've written the paper.
Yeah, but we copied it from Cialdini. Yeah.
But there were these three central mechanisms for influencing behavior, and now both of us can't remember the third one.
Yeah, and so there are a lot of strategies actually that have been identified. There's this professor from London University College, UCL, University College London, and Susan Mickey, and she has identified a couple of hundred influencing strategies. She focuses on the domain of health, influencing health behavior, but also those strategies can be used for many other domains. So yeah, that's really a developing area of identifying, clustering, influencing strategies. There are so many. People are influence one another also in so many different ways. Combining strategies to one another, first doing some pre-work like bonding to people, and then starting to pose certain questions, right?
So you think being a little bit too linear about it, saying people are just influenced by the threat of getting in trouble, or because they just want to copy or imitate or compare themselves to other people. You think these are a little bit too narrow, and there's actually we should be quite inventive and expansive in thinking about all many ways that you can influence human behavior, but still grounded in the theory of understanding how humans behave.
Yeah, but there's a lot of theories, and there's a lot of theories and no consistency yet in the domain of psychology to what the basics are of what drives people, makes people tick. So, and in addition, there's so many different sources of influence around us continuously. There's food, there's internal systems, there are drivers in certain directions, other people, other things that we want to attain in our lives. And technology is trying to make people do certain things, like, for example, save energy, consume less energy, has to compete with those other forms of technology in a way. Yeah, the shower gives you warm water and is influencing you in a way, right, to stay there for a longer period of time. And turning that warm water tap down is going to be difficult to make people do that. So,
well, this is where I wanted to jump into this concept of educational. You mentioned before the amount of cognitive load and the amount of concentration and brain matter we have for behaviors. So in that area of thinking, one thing that a lot of people don't know about in sustainability and environmental change is that people make the assumption that if we just educated people and if we got people to care, that would be enough. Then we would create change. We call it the value action gap or the information deficit hypothesis. And I talk about this stuff all the time. And I would say 98% of people I talk to, like professional sustainability folk, have never heard of it before. Like, it's just not getting out there, this concept. And so people think that if we just know all about it, that education and that concern for the earth, what's it called, a biospheric appeal, will really work to get people to act. And it doesn't work, and partly, so I could just jump into this. It doesn't work partly because it's so intellectual and cerebral and takes so much thought to really comprehend these like really big scale issues, but also like what you've been discussing about the persuasive technology, it doesn't happen at the time and the place, and it doesn't happen in real time. So it's actually probably one of the least effective ways to get people to change. Can you just talk a bit more about the failure of educational approaches to behavior change?
Yeah, there's a lot of campaigns that the Dutch government, for example, has financed and run on national television to educate people on sustainability-related issues, and those campaigns are quite effective in informing people and changing their attitude about sustainability. Everybody thinks now, yeah, we should save the planet, but changing your own behavior and understanding what the link is between your own behavior and saving the planet, which is quite a big goal, right, is difficult and is not that clear even in those campaigns. So, and okay, perhaps sometimes, and indeed more and more campaigns are used and educational material is developed that tells us much more precisely what it is that we need to do. But even then, the precise consequences of me today dropping a few batteries in the garbage bin and not bringing them to some special deposit, I don't know what the consequences of that are. So making use of those inborn sensitivities that people have is probably much more effective and can bypass this whole cognitive system that we can also use for other purposes and change behavior much more directly, just as other influencing strategies around us are trying to do, like that pizza that's really drawing you in. People know that they should stop smoking, and still it is really, really difficult for them. You can confront them with the negative consequences of smoking, like on cigarette packages, and they'll show off those pictures to their friends and try to collect as many packages with gross pictures on them as possible. Indeed, it's going to work as one of the strategies in a large set of strategies that you use. So we do have to educate people. We do have to inform them, use their brain, but also we need to use the rest of the system. And that most of that system is sensitive to these more unconscious influencing strategies.
So from what I understand, that we can use education in this concept of priming. Like the education won't be necessarily the thing that gets you to act. I mean, you'd really have to have a very powerful, very passionate, almost like an outlier of a person to watch a documentary on climate change, and then you go through your life and you just fix everything up. And there are people like that, but they're quite rare, those people. But with most people, that you understand education and emotional concern as a base layer primer, and then you need to add the behavioral psychology levers on top, which is like feedback, being in the right time in the right place, using data, using social comparison, comparing people with the social robotic agent, and all these mechanisms. I mean, do you see it that way, that one's like a base coat almost, and then there's the action is like the hook on top?
Not necessarily. So those influencing strategies to which people are naturally sensitive are going to be effective even when you don't know anything about sustainability and the relationship between energy consumption and the polar bear dying or whatever. If you see a smiley when you perform a certain behavior and a frowny when you should perform another behavior, your behavior is going to be influenced into a certain direction. So there's no necessity for you having some understanding of the sustainability related effects of that behavior. There's some buttons that are just so primitive and primal, so to say, that they're going to be effective and bypass that cognitive system completely. Yeah. But then again,
I was listening to a podcast the other day from a guy who studies chimpanzees and psychology or something. And he was talking about, like, which is what you mentioned about things being primitive parts of the brain, and that some people get upset when I tell them that education is not the best way to do behavior change, because I think it's a sign. That's what I say basically education isn't a very strong way to get people to change. And getting people to care about the planet isn't very strong. And one thing that is strong is getting people to compare each other. And people can get really upset by that sometimes. They're like, basically what I'm saying is that humans are fundamentally evil, that caring doesn't lead to action because we're so selfish and lazy, and that all we care about is keeping up with the Joneses and competing with each other. And these two things are just these like terrible afflictions, and that we should be fundamentally intrinsically motivated, and people are sad by that. And I say, no, these are not bad things. These are just the way the brain is. Now, I don't understand that much about neuroscience, but from what I am starting to understand is that there are primitive fundamental parts of the brain that the way humans as an organism, for us to get food, to be able to survive, that we work together in tribes, that the coordination of humans, and so being able to trust other people. So that's another thing that's in behavioral psychology, doing pledges, commitment devices, asking, would you like to commit to this, right? That trust between people is these fundamental old parts of the brain, old evolutionary meaning old. And how are we getting good feedback from people? Does the tribe like us or does not like us? Are we keeping up with the tribe's norms? Are we fitting in? And that when we're using these mechanisms, we're getting into these very primal parts of the brain. And when we're watching a documentary on polar bear ecology, we're in a much more modern, evolutionary speaking, modern part of the brain. So it's just not going to like strike us as deeply. I mean, does that sound like I'm seeing it right when I explain it like that?
Now, so these documentaries, of course, use a mixture of using strategies that are a bit more simple and don't need too much cognitive attention, like certain forms of music in the background, right? And dying animals, but also information to which you need to spend much more attention. So both can have their own effects. However, a documentary is not very precisely connected to your own behavior, and it doesn't hurt you, that documentary, I mean, when you press the up button of the thermostat in your living room. So in that sense, it's distal from the place where you actually cause the behavior.
Oh, interesting. It doesn't give you any lack or pain, or it's not connected to your own personal use at all.
It'll make you feel depressed. And indeed, these motivational systems that people have are connected, of course, very much to what we think about and how we're processing information and stuff. So we are able to change our behavior also using much more conscious mental mechanisms. So we are able to change our behavior, but it's a bit more effortful and difficult, and we don't do it too often. And what we do very often is allow ourselves to be steered around by the situation. And whether people are inherently evil, that's not quite a thing that I would say. But what we do say, and what social psychology helps us understand, is that very often people are steered around by their situation, not necessarily too much by characteristics of them themselves, but rather by things that shape their behavior in the environment. Like, for example, the elevator being hidden in the corner of the building behind some doors, and the other way around, the stairwell being hidden and the elevator in the center of the building. It's the environment that makes me use the elevator. It's the store that makes me buy the unhealthy food, you could say, because the unhealthy food is displayed in a certain way. It's like at the entrance is producing certain smells, and the healthy stuff may be hidden. Although you can also design, and there's research that shows this, stores and restaurants where the healthy food is like promoted, and cues and unconscious influencing strategies are used. Like, for example, the simple fact that you only have to take a few steps towards the healthy food and a few more steps to the unhealthy food, that make you change your behavior and eat more healthy food. So you should change people's environments and thereby change people's behavior. And then you're like, again, on top of people's behavior and both in time and in place.
Well, this is something that happens a lot. I would say maybe 1 in every 20 or 30 people I talk to. Often people in my world I'm reaching out to or talking to, I would say 1 in 20 or 30 people, just says to me, I think behavior change as a field is just BS, because ultimately we need to change the system. And why would we bother trying to change or understand people's behavior when, like you said, with the elevator, I mean, the stairs should have been built that way in the first place. And that's a really big discussion, and there's a lot to that. But I mean, the reality is that we have systems that have been built for us badly, and you can't just go to your office building and suddenly be like, hey, let's like switch the whole building design around, take the building out and build a new one. We are living in systems that have been designed badly. And so we need to get from here to there, and we need to understand human psychology and how to make these incremental shifts towards the better design. And it really is about ultimately changing the system. It's like we're trying to looking at the whole system and influence the players within that system.
Yeah, the user is part of the system. And we develop technology and of course, there's old cars, there's old buildings that will be around for some time. But if we develop these new cars, new buildings that, for example, are able to save energy, use less energy, people will use them in such a way, if you don't take care of also influencing user behavior, that they consume more energy than would be necessary with such a car. Research shows that when people are able to drive more miles on a gallon of gas, they buy homes a bit further away because their housing prices are a bit lower. And now with the same amount of gas, you can drive a bit further. So the total equation of energy consumption does not go down even when people drive more sustainable cars. People leave on the energy saving light bulbs the whole night because they think, it doesn't use any electricity at all, or at least to a very low amounts. It's an energy saving light, right?
I do that. I leave all my LED lights on a lot.
Yeah. You might also switch them off. And we need to take care of both behavior and also the innovation. Yeah, they're related to one another. Innovation is a new technology and also a new behavior.
Right. So it's essentially when you're looking at an entire system of many people, thousands or even millions of people, we can't necessarily stop people doing everything, because that would be a fascist totalitarian regime where you are only allowed to drive your car 20 miles a week. Otherwise you get put in jail. I mean, that would be crazy, right? So we do allow people to have individual freedoms, but so we need to employ these nudges and these type of behavioral designs in the system, which ultimately is designing the system. It's not, let's just change the world through individual behavior alone. Essentially, individual behavior design is system design when you're thinking about it like that.
Yeah. And all technology that we develop indeed is, much of it is developed for people and takes into consideration characteristics of the user. And if we think of the person in a certain way, like for example, is lazy, and then we're going to develop technology that doesn't really make people responsible themselves. And developing technology is not just developing technology. It's also developing technology for people and developing technology in some ethical, cultural ecosystem in which we have a certain model of people and ideas about individual freedom, for example. Yeah. So we can't just kill people off. That would be like really sustainable if you do it with a lot of people.
I get it. I wanted to jump into this idea of shaming and negative feedback, because in your research it showed that when people got negative feedback, like they get the frowny face or they get the red light, it works better than getting the green light. However, one thing that people ask me a lot, they say, but Katie, if you put people on a leaderboard and you tell them they're doing a bad job and you show that, you were the worst environmental performer of everyone else, isn't that shaming? Isn't shaming bad? I mean, can you just talk a little bit more about why negative feedback is more powerful, perhaps we should not be afraid of giving people negative feedback, and at what point does it become shaming? Should we not go too far? What's the healthy range of negative feedback before people will shut it down as shaming?
What we've studied is the effects of certain forms of feedback on energy consumption behavior. And some of those forms of feedback were social forms of feedback. And there we found, but also for the non-social forms of feedback, actually, the negative versions of that feedback were more effective than the positive versions of that feedback. Taking into account that when you're receiving positive feedback, sometimes you can't save too much more because you're already doing quite well. And reasons for this might be several. For example, people may not like it too much to be negatively evaluated by other people. People positively evaluating is really nice, but people negatively evaluating you negatively is like, could be deadly in an earlier society. People distrusting you can really impact your own survival chances. So there links might be found. There's much more research in psychology that shows that negative information is much more salient to people than positive information. And people like those Nobel Prize winning economists showed people dislike a lot to lose money, and also like, but less so, not in a mirrored way, winning the same amount of money. So it's negative information that really stands out to people, and especially perhaps when it comes from other people in their evaluation of you. Yeah, so
I think we'd know, we'd all been there, haven't we? Where like you get like all these compliments on something you've done, and then one person is rude, and even though you got like 300
you
compliments,
keep on thinking
and
about
all
that.
you can think about is like the mean person, and you're like, oh, it's just like so sharp.
And what we haven't studied, of course, is other types of effects of negative information. It might be the case that when this robot or this artificial social agent on screen tells you something about your energy consumption and keeps on telling you your energy consumption is terrible, sir, that after a while you just switch it off. Or if you're given the chance you buy another type of washing machine that doesn't contain such an people also get rid of their wives, right? When she keeps on nagging you about that stuff. So it might be quite effective, but it may also have other negative consequences. And of course, when you are selling a product, like for example, electricity, you don't want the customer to start hating you or have a negative feeling about your company. So
well, that's what happened with O-Power. You must know the company O-Power that gives you a social comparison chart in your electricity bill. I went to a talk that they did once, and they said they gave people like a frowny face. You either got a frowny face or like a neutral face or like a smiley face. It was just a medium good or bad. And they got so many complaints about the frowny face that they had to get rid of the frowny face altogether. I don't know if they were being overly sensitive to it. Sometimes they might have just had a few people complaining. But anyway, they got rid of the frowny face because people were outraged at their frowny face. And so now you get nothing, one smiley face or a double smiley face. I mean, like, that's how sensitive and lame people are. I'm like, really, guys, you can't handle, are you really that emotionally fragile that you can't handle a frowny face, that now you need to have like a double smiley face? But it seems to me,
they may indeed have lost the powerful form of negative social feedback. I have had a lot of discussions with my colleagues on the other side of the swinging door at our department, who are the philosophers. And they have certain perspectives and reasoning about how you how you should influence people, how you can do it, how you're allowed to do it. And they have a lot of issues with subliminal feedback, of course. And one of the solutions that they proposed was, well, you could ask people up front something like, okay, we have this influencing system here. It's going to be quite effective. Here's some research to back that up. However, you may not like it too much, or it's going to influence you in unconscious ways. Just sign here, and then you're going to buy it yourself. So either you do it or not, you buy into it or not. And then when they do say yes to it, you might be able to use such influencing strategies, unconscious ones or even negative ones, that retain.
So we ask people to agree to the frowny face. Say, would you like to have this feedback? And if you do badly at electricity, you'll get frowny faces, maybe even like a really angry frowny face from time to time. And then if they accept it, I mean, I'm of the opinion that people just need to suck it up and just grow a bit of a spine and deal with, it's not like real shaming is like saying you're an asshole, you're fat, or you're ugly, or I hate you. That's like a nasty, abusive thing to experience. We're not in any way doing that. We're just showing people data with a little bit of a nudge to it. And I don't think these systems of negative feedback should be canned because the occasional hypersensitive person can't deal with a frowny face.
Yeah, there is a balance, of course. So people need energy, and you don't want them to be confronted with negative continuously until they use zero energy. So you have to use certain limitations there. There may also be other forms of influencing that you might use to make people use less energy. For example, in a very intriguing line of research, we used the color of room lighting to influence people's comfort level perceptions. We put people in this room to do some tasks, distract them basically, actually. And then for half of our participants in that room, we had installed white ceiling lights, of which the white color was a bit more towards the red side. And for the other half of our participants, that white color was a bit more on the bluish side, like in an office. And the first, the reddish one, being a bit more like at home. And after some tasks, we also asked people to fill out some questionnaires containing, amongst others, questions about comfort levels in that particular room, and also asking them for an estimate of the room temperature, and questions about their intentions, their willingness to change the room temperature. And we found an influence of such lighting changes of which people were not aware. They were also between participants, actually. So some participants had the one, some had the other type of lighting, but they didn't notice anything about the lighting. And still, that lighting influenced people's comfort perceptions. More red light leading to higher comfort perceptions and lower intentions of people to diminish room temperature by changing the thermostat settings. You might also do that in summer, perhaps. We haven't studied it, diminishing people's urge to turn on the air conditioner, and thereby changing people's situations. You might be able to change their perceptions and to change their energy consumption behavior.
Well, I think that could be potentially quite applicable to commercial buildings when you have a lot of fluorescent lights, and a lot of people in commercial buildings account for about half of all of the electricity used. And you've got architects and interior designers specifying all of the lighting. So if they know that there's this relationship between the building, the BMS setting of the temperature range, they'll be able to nudge that a little bit. And if you've ever worked in commercial buildings, everybody knows that it's the BMS that is the big driver of, well, basically the temperature. For anyone who doesn't know, the temperature settings, the range, the coolest and the highest point in the setting. But if you can nudge that a little bit, that's where all of your carbon wins are.
And there may also be other determinants related to people's...
One, just before we finish up, one thing. Sorry, I'm just looking at my questions now. Now, I asked you this in the other one, but I'm going to ask it again because I think it's a fun question. When I hear about... Wait a second, start again. You've run experiments where you get a little robotic cat, right? And the cat tells you that you're doing a good job or you're doing a bad job, and it smiles or it frowns and its ears light up green or red, and the effect that has on energy consumption. It seems to be that this robotic cat is quite a creative solution. It's a lot more complicated than a smiley face or a frowny face. And when I think about this, I think, wow, we could get like so creative. We could have like little creatures that live on your desktop and cool little animals or outdoor lights. What if we had like a giant bear like in the middle of the city, a creature, and the giant bear, I mean like 20 feet high, something like a big art installation, and it changed color like all through the day depending on how the city was doing, and it smiled. Maybe it had like a screen on its t-shirt and it said like, hey San Francisco, or hey, where's the city where you are? Is it Eindhoven? Is that the city, or is that the...
That's the city.
Hey Eindhoven, good job, bad job.
800 years old.
We're doing...
Yeah, the
but
bear
you can be so creative.
Isn't here, so... Your bear is a very creative idea. Well, but the cat was like on top of my washing machine, right?
Okay. So for the city, but the point... Oh, can you hear me? Okay, you're frozen now. Are you back, Jaap? Okay, I can hear you again. Okay, I can hear you. But my question is, how creative should we get in these types of feedback? Like, are we going to get a lot of bang for our buck when we're going all out there with creative agencies and designers and character animators to make these really incredible characters that give all this sort of subtle cues of feedback? Or can we just get by with the smiley face and the frowny face?
One response to the bear is over there. and it is not on top of my washing machine. So even though I know, the city is doing good or bad, what does that tell about me? We've run research on giving people group feedback as for energy consumption in which they were told, yeah, your group is doing quite well. And also at the same time, we gave them individual feedback. And that research suggested that some people indeed are sensitive to group feedback, but that were the participants whom we studied in Japan. And because we also ran that study in Tokyo, but when we ran the study in the Netherlands, it was mainly individual feedback that people received that they were sensitive to. Telling them your group is doing well, they didn't care too much about it. Telling them you are doing quite well and you're being the best of the group or the worst in the group, that's what they responded to in our Dutch sample. And probably in America, you'll find even more individual responses. Yeah. So the bear is in the middle of the city and it's not telling me too much about my own energy consumption behavior.
Yeah. But my question that got cut off before was, when I look at the study on the robotic cat, and I look at that's a much more creative delivery than just a smiley face or a frowny face. And I think, like, I'm a designer. I'm always thinking of creative ideas. I think, wow, how creative can we make these feedback systems? Can we get Pixar involved, and can we get some animators, and can we go all out with like the character expressions and have people really bond with them and have it hatch out of an egg and really make elaborate social avatar? How much bang for the buck do you think we'll get going from the crudest smiley frowny face right up to like something like highly elaborate in terms of the way it affects people, the causal mechanism of what it gets people to do?
So research on the effectiveness of social influencing strategies suggests that it is relatively simple buttons in people's cognitive systems that you have to press, and that just presenting that basic form of a smile and two eyes can already do the trick. And that adding texture of the skin to such a face or hair or whatever doesn't matter too much. It is those basic elements that should be in there or not, a frowning face or a smiling face. And investing too much in the technology, in hiring such an expensive company, probably doesn't add too much to its effectiveness. It may add to other things, like, for example, people's evaluation of your feedback, whether they like the movie or the technology. That's going to be influenced, and that may also be important, whether it's attractive to them, whether they buy it when they see it. But the basic effectiveness probably won't increase too much, because we feel bad when something doesn't even have to be a human being. We don't even have to be aware or think that it is a human being somehow behind this technology. Even if we know that it's totally fake, still this frowny or smiley is going to be effective. So investing in expensive technology is not too much worthwhile there, probably.
Oh, so you've just like slaughtered my idea of working with Pixar to make like this incredible animated creature. But I think what you said, it might help, for example, with like marketing. People might be attracted to it just for the marketing rather than the actual thing that creates the change.
Yeah, and indeed what we have, for example, not studied is how to sell these smart thermostats in a store to people, for example. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. It was one of my other questions, is that I've seen a lot of these colored lights before. I put a book together on all this stuff. There was like the ambient orb. I've seen them on Kickstarter. One of my friends did one called the glow light. And although it seems to be that this behavioral science stands up, that when you see the light, people respond. I'm working on one called Energy Lollipop as well. But they don't seem to have been commercialized and be out there. It doesn't seem to be that it's not that hard to have every house and every city basically have a light that just communicates the kilowatts or carbon emissions. Do you have any insight into why that none of this stuff seems to have commercially gotten off the ground?
Nah, I don't know. Your home heating system does give you very simple base feedback as for temperature by making the room more comfortable or not. But indeed, these companies haven't really provided us with too simple feedback as for energy consumption. Yeah.
It might be that there's just not the commercial market for it that there is for other things. Like, unless the utility or the government is going to pay for it. I mean, I don't know if people are going to be racing out to spend, and often they're expensive, they're like $100 on a light. I mean, that's probably how much it would have to be to work to be able to cover its costs. But it's a shame. It's like a really great idea that could be really important, but there's just not a natural free market mechanism for it.
No. Yeah, and also there is no platform on which programmers, amateurs can use people's smart home data or somehow connect to that data and present certain types of interfaces. So it is only the electricity companies that have access to your data, basically, and they can present it to you in certain forms. If you would be able to take that data stream somehow and give it to a psychologist who doesn't have the commercial interests or some people on some online platform, and they will be able to build different forms of interfaces. You could test many interfaces and see which ones are most effective on interfaces on people's smartphones, etc. So there's still so many opportunities.
Well, we have one of those with PG&E here in California, but we got this. Isn't that cute? Yeah, we'll go and do activity after it. I heard the doorbell ring. We've got those really cool science kits she gets once a month. It's only like $15 or something, and it's like it's great.
A new one each month, but new tests and stuff.
It's so well done. It's got a little booklet and takes about maybe like an hour, and we make something. So we actually have one here in California. It's a PG&E API, except it's so badly done. It's impossible to use their API, and the data is 2 days old. We built one of our, and we built a really beautiful application of it, but it's just not good computer science for like hacking things together. A bit of computer programming and a bit of HTML, and you can try an interface, maybe a bit of PHP. Like, it's not that easy to use. You should be able to get, with my level of programming skills, which is like just a bit, like I should be able to program something up, and I would not be able to. It would be too hard for me to get a thread.
But your
thread
question
like
is an important one. Yeah, in the Netherlands, there's even one of these energy companies is selling a system, giving it away for free if you become a customer. It's called, that has as a label a first name of a person. Yeah, whatever, a Dutch name. But the system is not a personality, it's just a display with some numbers on it. So it was really surprising to me when I actually sold that system after being harassed with advising about it, in which that first name of a person was used to label the system. Still, the system was not a personality. And our research suggests that indeed systems with personality, pretending to be a social entity, can be much more effective than presenting people with numbers. And still they didn't do it, but they sold it as a person. So that's the first step, perhaps.
Well, so how did all of that design process happen from all those people at your utility, and that they didn't check in with you and people like you? Like, what's the disconnect going on? And that they didn't, so they did check in with you.
Company, and we told them, okay, we can help you out, but it's going to cost you a bit of money. And then
they didn't take your advice. That's what you're saying?
No, and also when the company that actually did build the technology for them was, and gave them advice on how to build it, was a marketing company. So that is indeed also an important consideration about which we don't have too much of a clue.
Right, but ultimately needs to do the behavior at the end of the day. So it seems to me, which is partly why I'm doing this podcast, why I'm so fascinated by this work, is that the decisions that are being made from government spending and utilities and cities are not versed in this, and they're not doing it properly as good as they could.
Yeah, and it's also not totally in their interest. So Dutch electricity companies are obliged to diminish energy consumption by 3% a year for each customer that they sell it to, but that's not too much, and it's a very soft requirement. So they can tell the government, okay, we couldn't make it because people buy more equipment, so they're using more electricity. But it's my own interest as a consumer to reduce my energy consumption. So if I or some organization of consumers would be like more in charge of these data and how they present it to me, perhaps then, the government does try to do it correct, right? Sometimes there's these smiling and frowning faces right next to freeways, for example, or streets.
So it's like a failure of market mechanism incentives that's going on. Well, this has been fascinating, Jaap. I've just got 3 questions to finish up our conversation today. And so the first one is, if you could have anything you wanted to happen in the future, where would you want persuasive technology in regards to environmental behaviors? Where would you want it to be in 100 years?
I'm quite sure that there's going to be a lot more persuasive technology around, technology that's going to influence our behavior, also influencing our energy consumption behavior, also making us do other things that are somehow considered positive for our society. At the same time, I also think it is very important to help people defend themselves. Using assistance, use assistive technology, defend yourself against influencing strategies, not get hooked by your smartphone, for example, and try to resist such influencing attempts. And also technology might start helping us out. Like a reminder on my smartphone might tell me, okay, take care, Jaap, here there's this influencing strategy that they use to which you are like super sensitive. So don't fall in the same trap again. So yeah, that balance is also very, very important to me, I'd say. Yeah.
All right. So you'd want us to be in a future where persuasive technology is used for good, not evil, where everybody can individually select the bits that will help us and be able to war off the persuasive technology that's trying to
that would be great. But that war is going to be very, very difficult and hard, like it is already now. And these devices sucking up our attention.
And our second question is, in the real world of sustainability managers who are trying to implement this stuff in governments and not-for-profits and cities, what would be the advice that you would give to them to best use behavioral psychology, feedback, persuasive technology to get better at their sustainability goals?
Now, I understand that there's many more interests that such companies have to serve, and it's not just a focus on behavior change that they can have. It's also selling their products and certain marketing issues, for example. Still, there's a lot of knowledge out there in the domain of behavior change that you can use and use it because, yeah, it's there. It's free most of the time. We try to publish open access nowadays in science. So we give all the knowledge away for free, and you should be able to use it and build influencing technology that is really effective in changing behavior.
Yeah, but the first thing is that people have to know about environmental psychology. They don't even know to look up the papers because they don't even know it exists. So that's my job, to get out there and like beat the drum and trying to help turn the papers into usable stuff for people. And the last question, what are you most excited about in your research right now?
Yeah, influencing people through their environment, through comfort experiences, through these unconscious channels. That's like really very, very intriguing. Like, for example, in that lighting example that I used, in which you use more bluish or more red lighting to influence human behavior. That is really intriguing. Unconscious influencing.
That was fascinating to discuss with you. I really hope we can help get the message out there, because I would love to see more colored lights and feedback mechanisms out there being used and being implemented. I don't think the technology is that hard to do, and I don't really see any reason why we can't be doing it more. And it's something I'm really excited to work on and see where it happens. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's always a lot of fun to talk about my own research, of course.
Yeah, well, hopefully we can make it happen. So thanks so much.